Alright guys, so today we're going to be going over the top 5 mistakes that beginner tortoise owners make. And this might not even be beginners, this might be just mistakes that people are making in general. Now, I've been doing this for nearly 2 decades now. I've raised, hatched several thousand tortoises, so I know what I'm talking about. This is coming from years of experience. I literally answer hundreds of emails every day, so I know what problems people are having, where they're going wrong, and how to fix those. So we're going to be discussing the top 5 of those today from my experience, and we'll get right into it going in reverse order. And number 5, the top 5, the 5th most common mistake I see is the enclosure. And now I'm not talking about overall the enclosure, I'm talking about actually choosing the type of enclosure for your hatchling. And for the purposes of this video, we are going to be discussing hatchlings and specifically sulcatas. So what you'll really want for a sulcata hatchling is an enclosed chamber type enclosure. Now what that means is it's enclosed on all sides, everything is enclosed. Now the reason for that is because it will help maintain temperatures and humidity levels. People will argue, they'll be like, oh, well, there's not enough ventilation, blah, blah, blah. It's not true. These tortoises spend 90% of their lives living underground. They have more than enough ventilation in an enclosed chamber type enclosure. So now some things also, just to preface this video, there's a lot of things I'm going to be recommending to you guys, and it's all going to be in a link down below in the description, an Amazon link that'll cover everything that I'm showing you guys. So enclosed chamber type enclosure. Now what you want to avoid are the open top enclosures, and that can be like tortoise tables. There's one that's really popular. It's made by Zoomed. Now, not to knock on Zoomed, they make lots of great products that I use, but they make a tortoise house. It's a wooden tortoise house. I would highly recommend not having that as well. It also has an open top. And avoid just wooden enclosures in general because they need lots of moisture, lots of humidity, and typically the wood is just not going to hold up. So an enclosed chamber type enclosure, a lot of them are made out of PVC, which is excellent. The PVC will last for a long time, and a lot of them have the built-in fixtures for your different heat lamps and things you'll need. So it makes it super easy, and they look really nice. They usually have sliding glass doors. Aquariums get a bad rep, but they will work excellent as long as you do 2 things. Number 1, you have to cover the top. If you just have it open or even a screen on top, that's not enough. Heat's escaping, moisture's escaping, so you got to be able to cover the top. And so the thing that they'll really knock you on an aquarium is they say that they overheat in an aquarium. They say, well, they're going to overheat in anything that's too small. So as long as you have it big enough, and I would recommend an absolute minimum of 40 gallons, preferably bigger. The bigger you can get, the better. So an absolute minimum of 40 gallons will give you enough space to have the different temperature ranges you need. So aquariums will work with some modifications, but any enclosed type, chamber type enclosure is what you want to shoot for. Alright, diving into the 4th most common mistake I see with tortoise owners, and that is their diet. And we're going to be talking about not only what they should be eating, but how much and how often to feed them. So those are the biggest mistakes they make. Now, with sulcata hatchlings specifically, I'm going to mention this phrase probably over and over again, and that is fresh is best. So you'll have a lot of people that will recommend feeding them hay. Now, hay nutritionally is just fine. There's nothing wrong with hay nutritionally. However, what you have to remember is during the drying process, hay loses about 90% of its nutritional value. And not only that, but it's so tough when it's dry that the hatchlings actually have a hard time physically eating it and breaking it into smaller pieces. So what happens if they are eating it is it'll kind of get clogged in their digestive system. It takes a whole lot more moisture and hydration for them to be able to process that, which they could be using in other areas of their body, which would be more beneficial to them. So it can really back up their digestive system in terrible situations that can even cause sepsis and ultimately death. So like I said, hay nutritionally is fine, and for older tortoises that can eat it, it's absolutely 2 thumbs up. Hay is great, but for hatchlings, steer clear of hay. What you should be feeding them, like I said, fresh is best. So the best thing you can possibly be feeding your hatchlings is fresh grass and weeds. That is number one, fresh grass and weeds. To go along with fresh grass and weeds, if you have mulberry trees, mulberry leaves, hibiscus leaves, you pretty much get any mulberry and hibiscus throughout the US. It pretty much grows everywhere. So if you have those are great options as well. Now to substitute for those three things, if you don't have a yard to pick from, or your yard has been fertilized or something and you can't pick the grass, an excellent substitute, again, fresh is best, is you go to spring mix lettuce. Now spring mix lettuce is great for them because it has all the different lettuces and things that are good for them all in one mix, so they're getting a nice variety, and it's still fresh, so it's green, they're getting moisture and nutrition and everything's still in their food. Now, if you don't have spring mix, which I don't know why you wouldn't, it's pretty much at every grocery store, but another good substitute for them, the only pellet feed I'd recommend is Missouri. Missouri Tortoise Diet is a good substitute if you don't have any of those items. You'll need to soak those pellets and get them nice and soft, and they'll eat those. Some foods to avoid are like mixed veggies, fruits, things like that. They don't need it in their diet whatsoever. So as far as how often to feed and how much, you will hear that you can overfeed a sulcata, which is absolute blasphemy. You cannot overfeed a sulcata tortoise. It's not going to happen. It's not possible. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen 0 cases of a sulcata tortoise being overfed. Now, what they will reference to back up that claim is they get really puffy, they get swollen, their skin is like protruding out of their shell, especially around their neck areas and leg areas. And what that really is they're eating too much foods that they're not supposed to be eating. So things that are high in toxins like spinach, broccoli, mixed veggies, things like that, if they're eating a lot of that stuff, that's going to create toxins that will build up in their system and cause them to swell, and it creates that puffiness that you're seeing. It's not from being overfed, it's just from being overfed things they're not supposed to have. So if you're feeding them the things like grasses and weeds and things like we mentioned before, if you're feeding them that, they will absolutely not get puffy. You will not be able to overfeed them. It's not possible. So things to avoid, like I already mentioned, are mixed veggies, fruits, things of that nature. As far as how often to feed them, they should have food available to them 24/7. So always have something in there available for them to eat. Now, like I said, fresh is best. You want the food to stay fresh. So if it's spoiling, if it's all like tons is going to waste, back off on how much you're feeding them. If you're feeding them and it's all getting eaten up right away, feed them more. You're not feeding them enough. And like I said, some of it will go to waste, some of it will dry out a little bit. That's absolutely fine because they should always have something available for them to eat. So that is most common mistake number 4. Now we're on to number 3, the third most common mistake I see tortoise owners make. And that has to do with hydration. And that's hydration overall. That's choosing your water, from how often you're soaking, etc. So this used to be number 1 on the list. This used to be one everybody had an issue with. But luckily over the years, there's been a better influx of information out there. And people are starting to understand how important soaking is to these tortoises and hydration in general. So this has moved down the list to number 3, which is awesome. That's a great thing. You always want those problems to move down the list. So let's dive into waters real quick, because the pet stores don't make it easy on new tortoise owners. And they do that with waters and lighting, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. So these are really the 2 waters they sell for reptiles. Now there's this one, which I've used for many years. It's a Reptarock. The problem with this is the actual depth of it is just fine for the water, but these ledges are just so vertical, and on the inside they are absolutely vertical. There's no grip for them to be able to get in and out safely, so they can flip themselves over in this water. It's just not very accessible for them. And because it is hard for them to climb into, you have to sink it down into the substrate. And the problem that causes is they're just pushing all the substrate into this water, and it usually only lasts for about an hour before it's just full of sludge. So get that one out of here. Don't use it. This one right here, also very common and popular. This is an absolute death trap for a hatchling. Do not use this. This is great. This is an excellent water for a juvenile or like a Russian tortoise, a Greek tortoise, something like that. This is an excellent water for that. For a hatchling, it is an absolute death trap. Remember, they do have ledges on here, which kind of make it a little easier for them to climb up to. But this is so tall and so deep. It's just an unnecessary amount of water. If you fill this up, they will absolutely drown in it. And because it's so high, they will absolutely flip themselves over in it. And if they flip themselves over in this, they're goners. Okay, they're not going to make it. So avoid this unless you're using it for a juvenile or something bigger. This is the water you want to have. They don't sell this in pet stores. Like I said, I have an Amazon link below. This is in that Amazon link. Many great things about this water. Number one, it's cheap. It's dirt cheap. It's much cheaper than the other two options. I think this is like $5 to $7. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but it's very cheap. The other great thing is it's the only one that's refillable. It has this extra tank of water on here, and it fills itself. Now, the depth of this is also perfect. It keeps your water level absolutely perfect. And it has these ridges. It has ridges on here, not only on the outside, but on the inside as well. So easy to get in and easy to get out. I also love that it's a corner water. You can stick it in a corner, which makes it easier for them to climb up those sides. And you usually have nothing going on in the corners anyways, and they usually use corners in the enclosure to flip themselves over. So this takes away one of your corners in your enclosure that they can't do that. As a matter of fact, I actually put 2 of these in mine and covered 2 corners. So they have water on each end. You don't have to do that, just my personal preference. So this water is the water you're going to want. Now on to soaking. I'm not going to cover soaking in depth here because I've already done a video on that. You can refer to my how to and why to soak Sulcata Hatchlings video, which is also on YouTube. But the mistake that tortoise owners make is they will not soak often enough. For a hatchling, you should absolutely be soaking daily for 20 to 30 minutes in warm water. So if you're told to do anything less than daily, run for the hills. That's false information. Now, if you're on a vacation, you're on a trip, you forget a day or 2 or something, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to make much of a difference. But if you're in the habit of missing 2-3 days every week, that becomes an issue. Because they will absolutely get dehydrated in their enclosures with all their heat lamps and all that stuff. They need that added hydration. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much into why and all that. That's in the other video. But the biggest mistake they make is not soaking enough and not having the correct water. So that is number 3 on this list. All right, on to the second biggest mistake that tortoise owners make. And that is where to actually purchase your tortoise from. Now, I'm going to sound biased in this because I'm a breeder. I have my own business. That's fine. I can sound biased, but I'm telling you from experience, this is one of the most important factors in your hatchling's life is where you purchase it from. Now, really who you want to be purchasing from is a breeder. Absolutely, I've raised many animals. If you can think of an animal, I've probably owned it at one point in my life. Tortoises are the number 1 animal you should be getting from a breeder. Now, the reason for that is because tortoises, the very first 2 to 3 weeks in their life are the absolute most important stage of its life. And the breeder is in charge of what happens during those 2 or 3 weeks. If they don't get the proper start to life, it's going to affect the rest of their life 50, 60, 70 years down the road if they make it that far, depending on what the breeder did to start off its life. So you're going to want to get from a responsible, reliable breeder. Now, how do you pick a responsible breeder? There's several ways you can do this. Number 1 is just the easiest and most simple is look at the pictures on their website, or if they don't have a website, the pictures they send you, the pictures in their listing. Look at the tortoises that they're advertising. Look at its shell. Is it a smooth shell? Does it look like it's nice and moist, or does it look like it's dry and flaky? Look at the skin. Look at the tortoise's skin. Is it nice? And it should be like moist and succulent skin. You shouldn't see cracks and dryness in the skin. Are its eyes sunken in? If its eyes are sunken in, it's dehydrated. So these are things to look for when you're looking at pictures of the tortoises. Now, something else I would absolutely always recommend asking questions. Ask, ask, ask. Ask away on questions. Ask me these questions. Ask, what kind of guarantee do you provide on your tortoises? If they don't provide any guarantee, I'd run for the hills. Get out of there, because there's plenty of breeders that will provide guarantees. I'm not the only one that provides a guarantee. I do provide a full year health guarantee. As far as I know, I think I'm the only one doing that. So if I'm providing a full year health guarantee, you should not be buying something that they don't provide any guarantee at all. Make sure they provide some sort of guarantee, not only in the health of their tortoises, but also in shipping as well. There shouldn't be any risk for you, the buyer, in shipping. It should be on the breeder. I assume all of that risk when I ship tortoises. Ask questions like, how often are you soaking? As a matter of fact, better yet, don't ask them that, because they will all just say daily, because they know that's what they're supposed to do. What you should do is ask them, how much should I be soaking my tortoise? How often should I soak it? Do I have to soak it daily? Pretend like you're kind of like, I don't want to soak it daily. Because then they'll tell you what you want to hear. If they tell you like, oh yeah, just a couple times a week, that's fine, no big deal. Run for the hills. Needs to be soaked daily, absolutely. Ask what they're feeding them. We've already been through the diet stuff, so you know what to feed them. Ask what they're feeding them. Ask what their enclosure's like. How do they keep them? Things like this. If they can't answer those basic questions, you should be looking for a different breeder. Now, the biggest thing is if they mention hatchling failure syndrome, get out of there as fast as you can. Hatchling failure syndrome is a myth made up by breeders as an excuse for their poor breeding practices. Hatchling failure syndrome absolutely does not exist. It is not a thing. Okay, if excuse me, if hatchling failure syndrome existed, I would go out of business, because I provide full year health guarantees to all my tortoises. There's some breeders that will tell you that a hatchling has a 50% chance of living, which blows my mind. That's absurd. I've hatched thousands. There's zero that should be dying. Zero. There's no reason the tortoise should die unless the breeder did something wrong or you're doing something wrong. There is a reason for it, not just a magical hatchling failure syndrome explanation. So run for the hills if they mention that. So where to buy your tortoise is extremely, extremely important. And unfortunately, I see this every single day. People email me telling me horror stories about where they got their tortoise, and it's a mess. So make sure you're purchasing from a reliable breeder. That is number 2 on this list. Now, for the number 1 most common mistake I see new tortoise owners make is they overheat their tortoises, and they get the lighting just in general and the heating wrong, completely wrong. Overheating is by far, in a way, the number 1 cause of death in Sulcata hatchlings. It dries them out, their shell goes soft, they go inactive, it leads to sepsis, it darkens up underneath, you can see them rotting from the inside out, and that's because they don't have their organs go into kidney failure and organ failure, because they don't have enough hydration to support their digestive tract or anything like that, and they end up dying. So hydration also goes along with this as well, but the cause of that is their enclosure is being way overheated. So we're going to go over lights that you should be using. Again, all this is going to be down in the description below in that Amazon link, so to make it super easy for you guys. And I'm going to make this kind of an easy lighting guide. So number 1 on the lighting, there's 2 things you need. You need UVB and you need heat. Okay, so we're going to go over those things. This is what I would recommend for your UVB. This is a tube style UVB light. Now, people get confused because there's lots of different terms, there's different wattages. We're going to cover all that. The wattage on these bulbs are super easy to understand once you know what it's meant to be. The wattage is only referring to the length of the bulb. That's it. That's all the wattage means, is how long it is. So you can look up the product description. It'll say 54 watts is 4 feet long. I don't know. Don't take me for word on that. I don't know. But it'll say in the product description, the wattage is the length. Now, what length do you choose for your enclosure? What I would recommend is 75% to 100% of the length of your enclosure. So for example, if you got an enclosure that's 4 feet long, you're going to want something that's a minimum of 3 feet long up to 4 feet long. I personally like full coverage. I like full coverage UV over my entire enclosure. If they want to escape the UV, they can go into their hide. That way they're getting full coverage UV just like they would if they're outside. The sun is out there. They have their shaded spots they can go to, but the sun covers everything. So the other thing you'll see mentioned besides wattage is like it'll say T5 or T10. Now what that means is T5 is more of for tropical species. T10 is more for a desert species. Excuse me. The problem with sulcatas is they're not truly a desert species. They're not truly a tropical species. So really you can't go wrong with either one. I personally prefer to use the T5s, more on the tropical side. I think they get more than enough UV that way. And like I said, it helps with humidity, things like that. I think they do lean a little more tropical. But like I said, you really can't go wrong either way. If you get a T5, T10, it's not going to make a world of difference either way. The actual difference in the bulb is the T10s will be a little thicker. The T5s are a little skinnier. So this is the tube style UV. And now what this does, this produces light and UV for your tortoises. That's it. These don't really produce heat. This is not meant to be a heat source in any way, shape, or form. Now, for heat, you got really two options. You have a basking bulb and a ceramic heat emitter, or a CHE is for short. I personally don't even use a basking bulb anymore. The reason for this is you can get a basking spot out of your CHE, and this is a must-have regardless whether you have this or not, because this is also going to be for your nighttime temperatures because it produces just heat and no light. So I personally like to use this because it kind of killing two birds with one stone. You can have this on during the day, have this on at night, or just keep this on 24/7, which is what I do. Now the wattages on these and on these both will influence the heat. So the higher wattage, the more heat it's going to produce. I can't tell you what wattage to get because every enclosure and situation is different. I would start off with a lower wattage and work your way up because like I said, you do not want to overheat your tortoises. This is the #1 killer by far. So people will tell you you need to have be like 90 to 100 degrees in your enclosure. What you want your enclosure to be for a sulcata hatchling is anywhere in the 80s. 80s is like their happy place, their sweet spot. They're not being dehydrated if they're in the 80s, okay? Once they start creeping up over 90, they absolutely are getting dehydrated. It's another reason why I don't like the basking bulbs is because if your enclosure is too small, this basking bulb is going to heat up the whole thing way more than it should. Whereas this is more of an ambient heat, which kind of spreads the wealth a little bit more. If your enclosure is big enough, sure, you can go for this. Your enclosure should be big enough to support these varying temperature ranges. So if you have a basking spot, there's no need for it to be over like 95 degrees. That's plenty. Even 90 to 95 degrees is more than enough for a basking spot. You want the rest of it to be between 80 and 89 degrees. Preferably in the lower 80s for where they're sleeping 80 to 85. You don't want it to drop below 80 degrees or they can be prone to respiratory infections and things of that nature. So 80 degrees is really their sweet spot and where you want to be. Now, like I mentioned before, pet stores don't make this easier on you. They sell a lot of combo type bulbs that'll say day and night, things of that nature. They literally do not make a combo bulb package like that will work for your sulcata. Don't buy them, avoid them. None of them are good. I'm going to show you some of them in this video. Don't use them, okay? Stay away from these types of bulbs. The other type of bulb you want to stay away from is another UVB bulb, not this one, is the coil style bulbs. Coil style bulbs, the problem with the coil style bulbs is two things. #1, they say it'll hurt their eyes. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think there's really any proof to back that claim. But the biggest reason behind it is you're really only getting isolated UV as opposed to UV spread throughout the enclosure. So it's really not enough to maintain proper UV levels throughout the enclosure. Now they have a little card that you can check UV levels and you can test it for yourself. If you're using a coil bulb, you'll notice if you're on the far side of the enclosure that it's really going to have a 0 UVB rating. So that's why you want to get tube style bulb, full coverage UV, stay away from the coil bulbs and anything like that. And absolutely the thing to remember, do not overheat your tortoises. Your enclosure, stay in the 80-degree range and you'll be good. Those are the top 5 things that I see new tortoise owners make. Those are the top 5 mistakes. I'm happy to help you guys. Visit azsulcata.com. I got a care page on there. The link to that Amazon link with all the supplies is also on there as well. Makes it super easy for you guys. I have recommended enclosures over on there, the lighting, substrates, bowls, all things of that nature. It's in the link. Makes it super easy for you guys. Also, feel free to comment down in this video. In the comments, I'm happy to help you out there. Email me at azsulcata@gmail.com. That's the best way for you guys to get help. Then I can send you links to all these different things, answer your questions, and help you out that way. Thanks again, guys. Please, please, please subscribe to this channel. Subscribe down below. Hit a like on this video. It would really help me out a lot. I appreciate it. That way I can make some more educational videos for you guys and help you out. Thanks a lot, tortoise lovers. Love you guys. I'll see you guys next time.